You know, when architects sit down to design a massive futuristic skyscraper, they don't just immediately sketch out these breathtaking glass walls and rooftop gardens.
Right, they'd be getting way ahead of themselves.
Exactly. I mean, they actually spend an agonizing amount of time just analyzing the dirt.
Oh, for sure. The soil completely dictates what's actually possible to build.
Yeah, you could draft the most spectacular utopian blueprint in human history, but if you try to build it on a swamp or, directly over an active fault line, the structural integrity just fails.
The grandest vision is totally subordinate to the ground it rests on.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive into the time traveler's vision heats this immediate, super fascinating roadblock.
Yeah, it's a big one.
We are looking at this extraordinary blueprint from our source material today for a heavily redesigned society. I mean, it outlines a civilization with drastically reduced inequality, expanded personal freedom, and this infrastructure built on profound, widespread cooperation.
It sounds incredible on paper.
Right. But the foundation we're trying to build it on is a swamp that philosophical circles call the human nature objection.
And that objection is, well, it's arguably the single most formidable barrier to any vision of a radically better world.
Because the argument posits that human history is essentially this highlight reel of greed and systemic violence.
Right, just the relentless hoarding of power.
So the logic follows that you can't possibly design a cooperative, trusting society when the raw material you're building it with—
Namely human beings.
Exactly, human beings, when they are inherently selfish and ruthless.
But here is where we need to look past the philosophical debates today. We need to look directly at the hard neuroscience to see what human nature actually is.
Because the answer to this objection doesn't actually rely on ignoring our brutal history.
No, not at all. It relies on understanding the biology behind it. What's fascinating here is that modern neuroscience thoroughly dismantles this premise of a singular human hard drive running like one fixed program.
Right. We frequently discuss human nature as if it's this immovable monolith, like a binary coin toss that just invariably lands on selfish.
Yeah, but our biological wiring is actually this vast collection of possibilities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if the objection assumes human nature is fundamentally bad, what does our actual physical brain structure dictate?
Well,
Like, are we biologically wired for greed, or do we actually possess the hardware for empathy?
we possess the complex circuitry for both. I mean, let's start with the fundamental operating principle of the brain, which is neuroplasticity.
Right, the brain isn't a rigid organ.
Exactly. It continuously restructures its physical pathways based on environmental stimuli and repetition.
So the exact same individual with the exact same genetic code is going to exhibit totally different behavioral profiles when placed in radically different environments.
Yes, and the sources point to mirror neurons as this prime biological example of our innate cooperative capacity.
I love the mirror neuron stuff. It shows we aren't just psychologically capable of empathy, but we are biologically hardwired to physically map the experiences of others right onto our own neural architecture.
Yeah, it's wild. When you observe someone taking an action or experiencing a strong emotion,
Like watching someone get hurt or something?
right, if you watch someone endure physical pain, specific clusters of neurons in your brain fire in a pattern that actually mimics their experience.
Wow.
Evolution literally equipped us to feel what others are feeling. The circuitry for profound connection and empathy is baked into our neurology just as deeply as the instinct for self-preservation.
And then you combine that with our endocrine system, right? Specifically the release of oxytocin.
Oh, absolutely, the bonding hormone.
Yeah, which chemically drives us to form trusting bonds and collaborate with our community. When you look at all that, the biological reality becomes undeniable.
The human brain contains the latent circuitry for extreme competition, but it equally contains the circuitry for intense collaboration.
Which means the critical question for you, the listener, as you evaluate this utopian blueprint, isn't what is human nature.
Because the biology proves our nature is highly adaptable.
Right. The vital question really is, which circuit is being fed?
Exactly. Which circuit is getting the energy?
And if our circuitry is that malleable, then the immediate question is, well, who or what is operating the switchboard?
Because the transition from a highly adaptable, cooperative infant to a ruthlessly competitive adult, that happens largely without our conscious consent.
Yeah, the sources dive into this by explaining how society basically influences the biological recipe.
The nature provides the ingredients, but society influences the recipe.
I love that phrasing. The human brain, especially in its developmental stages, basically acts as a sophisticated prediction engine.
Right. Its primary directive is to figure out how to survive and thrive within whatever specific cultural and economic environment it finds itself in.
Let's visualize how this actually works mechanically. Instead of thinking of the developing mind as a blank slate, think of it like a highly absorbent sponge placed in a bucket of water.
Okay, I like this.
It just soaks up the culture around it long before the conscious mind can even judge if the water is clean. Or, imagine the neural network as this dense, overgrown forest.
Right.
Every time an environmental stimulus demands a specific behavior, a neural signal travels a specific path through that forest.
So if an economic system demands ruthless self-interest and suspicion just to survive, the individual is forced to walk that specific path every single day.
And biologically, through a process called myelination, the brain actually coats that frequently used neural pathway in a fatty sheath.
It allows the signal to travel faster and more efficiently.
Yeah, so that little dirt path becomes a paved, high-speed highway. The behavior becomes an automatic default.
While simultaneously, through synaptic pruning, the unwalked paths literally overgrow with weeds.
The paths optimized for mutual aid or vulnerability?
Exactly. The brain eliminates synapses it deems unnecessary just to conserve energy. So it's not merely a philosophical shift.
No, it's a physical, structural redesign of the brain's architecture based entirely on what the environment says is necessary for survival.
And this perfectly illustrates the source material's point regarding foundational belief systems.
Yeah, like religion or core cultural myths.
Right, a culture that constantly reinforces the idea that humans are inherently selfish, maybe through a theological lens of original sin, or even an economic lens of hyper-individualism.
It provides the continuous environmental stimuli that literally pave those defensive neural pathways.
The environment shapes the belief, we internalize it, and then that belief dictates our biological response.
It's crazy. We construct political and economic systems that obsessively guard against selfishness, which inadvertently creates the very scarcity and fear that trigger selfish behavior in the first place.
It is a self-fulfilling biological prophecy. We engineer the exact behaviors we claim to be afraid of, simply by designing an environment that demands them.
Okay, I hear the neuroplasticity argument, and the mechanism makes perfect sense. But wait, I look at the broader natural world, and it seems to contradict this entirely.
How do you mean?
Well, competition exists everywhere in nature. It's survival of the fittest, right? The strong eat the weak. That's not a social construct, that's just the brutal reality of nature.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, evolutionary biology reveals this massive cultural misinterpretation of survival of the fittest.
Really?
Yeah, we've culturally weaponized the term fittest to mean the most aggressively dominant or violently competitive. But fitness merely means adaptability to an environment.
Ah, okay.
And in the vast majority of complex biological systems, cooperation is actually the far more dominant engine of long-term survival.
So the rugged individualist, like the lone wolf mentality, is essentially an evolutionary dead end.
Biologically speaking, absolutely. Just look at the transition from single-celled organisms to multicellular life. That is a triumph of intense, specialized cooperation.
Your own body relies on trillions of cooperating cells.
Exactly. Or look at eusocial insects like ants and bees, or pack predators like wolves. They don't dominate their ecosystems through individual ruthlessness.
Right, they survive strictly through complex, integrated mutual aid.
Which makes the way we structure human civilization almost comical in its contradiction.
Oh, totally. We worship aggressive competition in markets and politics, but the underlying infrastructure of our modern world secretly survives entirely on extreme, intricate cooperation.
Global supply chains, hospitals, scientific breakthroughs, international flight protocols.
Bridges, the power grids. None of this works for a single day without thousands of people cooperating flawlessly.
Right. We hyper-focus our cultural attention on the single CEO competing for market share, while completely ignoring the vast, silent machinery of thousands of engineers and administrators cooperating to make the product possible.
Even the human brain itself mirrors this requirement for integration.
Yeah, the prefrontal cortex, which handles impulse control and moral reasoning, isn't just trying to bludgeon the amygdala into submission.
The amygdala being our primitive threat center, our fear response.
Right. It doesn't dominate it. It has to negotiate with it. The conscious and subconscious elements of the mind, dialogue with one another. True neurological health is integration, not domination.
So evolution produced a spectrum of strategies, not just a solitary kill or be killed mandate.
Exactly. We possess the hardware for both cooperation and competition, It is the environment that tips the balance and determines which strategy dominates.
Okay, acknowledging all this deep-seated cooperation is helpful, but so what does this all mean for the time traveler's blueprint? Because we still have to deal with the reality of greed.
Sure.
It doesn't just magically disappear because we recognize our cooperative potential. People still exploit each other.
The time traveler's vision doesn't deny the existence of greed for a single moment. It just shifts the focus to how we design our social architecture around it.
Right. The argument introduces a really vital distinction between what exists within human emotion and what society allows to become dominant.
The two gardens analogy from the text captures this dynamic perfectly.
I really love this analogy. Imagine two distinct gardens. Both of them are inevitably going to sprout weeds, right? Greed, fear, selfishness.
They exist in both.
Yeah. One gardener ignores the weeds, or worse, implements this irrigation system that accidentally optimizes their growth while starving the actual crops.
While the other gardener actively manages the environment, they optimize the soil chemistry for the crops they actually want to harvest.
The inevitable presence of weeds doesn't mean gardening is impossible, and the existence of human greed doesn't mean civilization can't improve.
Exactly. We have to examine the physiological states our current garden triggers. Let's analyze the fear state.
Okay.
Imagine an economic system where your literal survival, your access to healthcare, housing, food, is heavily contingent on relentlessly outcompeting your neighbor.
Which sounds pretty familiar.
Right. What happens to the biology of the population living under those conditions?
The amygdala perceives a chronic, unending threat. The brain's alarm system basically never shuts off.
Precisely. And when the amygdala is active, cortisol, the primary stress hormone, it spikes and remains chronically elevated.
And the physical consequence of a brain flooded with cortisol is this radical shrinking of the temporal horizon.
You cannot engage in long-term visionary planning or extend profound empathy when your biology is screaming that you are under immediate attack.
You become hyper-defensive, reactive, and totally obsessed with short-term accumulation because your subconscious is just terrified of scarcity.
And society often rationalizes this physiological panic as ambition or drive. But neurologically, it is a profound state of insecurity.
Now, contrast that with the collaborative state that the time traveler's blueprint proposes.
If the baseline of survival is structurally guaranteed, meaning people are not terrified of starving or losing shelter, the threat response naturally deactivates.
The amygdala quiets down, cortisol levels drop.
And what takes its place? Oxytocin pathways are heavily engaged. When the threat of ruin is removed, people inherently become more trusting and collaborative.
Their prefrontal cortex comes fully online, which enables complex, empathetic, and long-term thinking.
The underlying human DNA hasn't altered a single base pair. The environmental shift simply activated a completely different set of biological responses.
And to see how truly adaptable we are, we only really need to look at our own history. The source material points out that we frequently mistake current societal structures for immutable laws of nature.
The divine right of kings is an excellent historical example of this.
No, yeah.
For centuries, the concept that one specific bloodline was fundamentally ordained by a higher power to possess absolute authority. That wasn't just a prevailing political theory.
No, it was accepted as a fundamental, inescapable law of human existence. The entire social, economic, and religious environment reinforced it.
And because the environment reinforced it so absolutely, the neural architecture of the global population accepted it as a baseline reality.
Just as societies globally accepted extreme systemic cruelty like slavery or the legal use of torture or the lack of women's rights.
Right, these weren't viewed as passing phases. They were deeply entrenched, assumed baselines of how humans operated.
But as the intellectual landscape shifted, as technology and economic conditions evolved, the environment changed.
And as the environment changed, humanity successfully dismantled those systems. We obviously didn't achieve perfection, and we're still wrestling with the remnants of those hierarchies, but we fundamentally changed the baseline.
We redesigned the garden.
Exactly. Which proves that what we frequently dismiss as an immutable law of human behavior is actually just a temporary reflection of the current social structure.
Human behavior is just astonishingly flexible. A population raised in systemic security develops entirely different cognitive capacities and moral frameworks than a population raised under the constant threat of ruin.
The implication of this adaptability is profound. The time traveler isn't ignoring human nature, they're observing it with extreme precision.
The realization here is that many behaviors we casually dismiss today as just human nature are actually trauma responses to highly stressful, artificially competitive social conditions.
Right. Which brings us to the ultimate radical realization of the time traveler's argument.
The cage was never locked.
The lock was just a story.
We've been collectively pacing inside this conceptual framework, insisting we can't build a better society because our innate nature simply won't allow it.
But by consciously designing environments that feed the circuitry for cooperation instead of the circuitry for fear, we completely rewrite the outcome.
It demands a total reassessment of what we believe we are capable of. And I want you, listening right now, to think about this in the context of your own life for a moment.
Yeah, think about a time you were deeply, genuinely generous.
Maybe you volunteered your time or helped a stranger or gave up a resource for a friend. Now contrast that with a moment you acted with surprising selfishness or hostility.
If you strip away the immediate event and just analyze the environmental conditions surrounding you in those exact moments,
Were you rested, financially secure, and feeling socially safe during the generous moment? And were you exhausted, threatened, or insecure during the selfish one?
you are the exact same person in both scenarios. The environment simply activated different neural pathways.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. But this raises an important question, however, one that serves as the final, most crucial hurdle in our sources.
Right.
If society influences human behavior so definitively, who gets to design the new rules? How do we prevent power from concentrating in a newly designed cooperative system, just as it historically did in competitive ones?
The biology undeniably proved the time traveler's vision is physically possible to achieve. The soil can handle the weight of the skyscraper.
We're building on the solid bedrock of neuroplasticity, not the quicksand of inherent selfishness.
But it leaves us with this lingering, highly provocative thought that the text circles but doesn't fully resolve for us.
And it's something for you to ponder.
If humanity's ultimate survival relies on designing this cooperative garden, how do we peacefully convince the current gardeners, the individuals who have hoarded all the harvest by thriving on ruthless competition, to hand over their tools?
How do we rewrite the architectural blueprint for society when they currently own all the pens?
It's the ultimate paradox of societal evolution. The foundation is ready, but the construction site is heavily guarded by those who profit from the swamp. Something to chew on until next time. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.